Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling a pretty big question today. How does America, really think about aging? You sent us this really interesting report, framing strategies to advance aging and address ageism on policy issues. And it looks like it's going to be a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it really gets into how we can totally change the conversation about aging, to create a society that really works for everybody, no matter how old they are.
It's pretty surprising, I think, how little we consider aging as like a public issue. You know what I mean? Something we all go through, but it feels like it's always just, personal responsibility.
Yeah, and that's kind of a problem, actually. This report basically says that if we don't collectively start thinking about aging differently, the changes we need to make for a society that's living longer and longer, they're going to be really hard to make. I mean, think about it. Policies could just stay the same or even get worse.
Yeah, that's kind of scary. And it's interesting that the report points out just how much aging is misunderstood in America. Like, we're going to have to bust some myths here.
Yeah. Get ready. There are a lot of them. One of the big ones is that aging well is only a matter of individual choices. Like if you just eat right and have good genes, that's all it takes. But this report, it's saying, no, no, no. Social policies and the structures of our society have a huge impact on how we age.
That makes sense. Like access to good health care, having financial security, even how our towns and cities are designed. That all plays a huge role. Like I was reading this article the other day about how walkable cities and stuff, they can make a huge difference in how independent older people can be.
Absolutely. And that's just one tiny piece of it. This report, it goes deep on the impact of policies like Social Security, Medicare, even how taxes work and how those can sometimes, disproportionately affect older people.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the systemic things that make it easier or harder to age well in this country.
So it sounds like what we're really talking about here is like a totally new way of thinking about aging. Not just like tweaking what we already have, but like a fundamental shift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And what's amazing is that this report, it came about because a bunch of different organizations, eight leading aging organizations, and then nine really forward-thinking funders all came together and decided, okay, we got to change how people think about this. This is important.
Like they said, we can't keep ignoring this problem. It's not just some, academic paper. It's like a call to action, I guess.
Totally. And, the report spends a lot of time talking about ageism, too, which is something we don't talk about enough. Even though it's a huge barrier for older people, it really keeps them from, fully participating in everything.
Oh, you know what? That reminds me of something I heard the other day about this woman. She's in her late 60s,
Yeah.
and she got turned down for a job. And the reason the guy who was hiring thought she'd be too old to handle the technology. It's crazy how much ageism is still out there, even in places you wouldn't expect it.
Yeah, and the scary part is this report says a lot of people don't even realize how widespread ageism is. Like they might make little comments or have, implicit biases without even thinking about the harm they're causing.
It's like this invisible force, shaping how people see older people and limiting their opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the report doesn't just start there. It talks about this really powerful strategy to fight against ageism, something called reframing.
Reframing. Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is that?
Oh, it's about making a conscious choice about, the words we use and the stories we tell to kind of shape how people think about aging. Think about it this way. If we always talk about aging as this time of decline and, burden, that's exactly what people are going to believe. But if we start talking about it as a time of, ingenuity and experience, the potential that comes with age, we can start changing those perceptions.
So instead of just changing the story, we're changing the whole lens, the whole way we view aging.
Right. You got it. That's it. And this isn't just some, fluffy feel-good approach. The report is really clear about that. It's based on real research, looking at what actually resonates with people and what messages can actually, lead to real change.
So tell me, what kind of reframing strategies are we talking about here?
Well, one that really stood out to me was framing aging through the idea of ingenuity.
Ingenuity. Okay, how does that work? Like, what does that look like in the real world?
It's about showing how aging can actually drive innovation, how it can lead to problem solving. Instead of seeing older people as out of touch, we start recognizing all the experience they bring, all the unique perspectives they have.
That sounds very American to me, right? We're all about innovation, finding solutions.
Exactly. And if we can connect to that core value, then we can start to see aging not as a problem to solve, but as a source of potential, something we haven't tapped into enough.
I like that. So instead of worrying about the graying of America, We celebrate all that wisdom and experience that comes with age.
You got it. The report even suggests sharing stories of older entrepreneurs, inventors, community leaders, people who are using their skills and experience to make a real difference. It's about painting this picture of aging as a time when people keep contributing, not a time when they decline.
So we're going from a narrative of burden to a narrative of opportunity. I'm liking this. Are there other strategies, other ways to reframe things?
Absolutely, there are. Another powerful one is building momentum.
Building momentum. Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more.
This one's all about highlighting the growth and learning that keeps happening throughout our lives. Instead of focusing on what people lose with age, we talk about what they gain, the knowledge, the skills, the wisdom.
So it's like you keep evolving, gaining momentum as you get older.
Exactly. And the report even talks about how we can use language to reinforce this idea, like talking about lifelong learning or gaining experience instead of, senior moments or cognitive decline.
So it's about focusing on the positives, not getting stuck on those negative stereotypes. I can see how that would change how people see aging.
It totally would. And the report goes beyond just language, too. It suggests we show real-life examples of older adults, who are learning new things, following their passions, making a difference in their
It's
communities.
like showing people that age is just a number, that you don't just stop growing and developing after you hit a certain age.
Exactly. And, the report also gets into how important it is to think about ageism as a social justice issue.
Hmm. That's interesting. I haven't thought about it like that before. Tell me more.
Well, it's about recognizing that ageism isn't just a personal problem, it's a form of discrimination,
Yeah.
and it goes against our values of equality and inclusion. The report says that if we frame it like this, it connects with people's sense of fairness, and that can make them want to do something about it.
So it's like saying, hey, this isn't just about being nice to your grandma. It's about standing up for what's right.
Exactly. And get this, the report actually lays out a three-step approach to talking about ageism in a way that really gets people's attention.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are the steps?
Okay, so first, you got to define ageism clearly. It sounds simple, but the report points out that a lot of people don't really know what it is or how it shows up in our lives.
Yeah, you're right. It's not always as obvious as other types of discrimination. It can be subtle, sneaky, and it's everywhere.
Exactly. So once you've got that definition down, step two is giving people real examples, things they can relate to that bring ageism to life. The report talks about things like, discrimination at work, healthcare that's not equal, or even how the media portrays older people.
It's about making ageism real, something people can grasp and connect with.
Exactly. And the last step, the report says, is to explain what implicit bias is and how it works.
Implicit bias. Those little mental shortcuts that can lead to unconscious discrimination, even when you don't realize you're doing it.
Exactly. And the report makes it clear we all have these biases, whether we know it or not. And once we understand that, we can start to be more aware of them and try to catch ourselves when they pop up. The report even provides resources for dealing with implicit bias.
This is fascinating stuff, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. I think maybe we should take a break here, and we can pick up the rest of this deep dive in part two.
That sounds good to me, yeah. We've got a lot more to unpack, especially when it comes to the specific language the report recommends and the storytelling strategies. It's really interesting stuff. It's pretty amazing how much words can actually, shape how we see things. We were just talking about how reframing can change how we think about getting older, and it really makes you think about the words we use all the time.
It's almost like we're programmed, right? We use these words, elderly or senior citizens, without even thinking about how they might be, reinforcing these stereotypes.
Yeah, and the report, it goes deep on that, pointing out how some of the language we use can make older people seem like it's like saying they're not as capable or that they need help all the time. It kind of puts them in a separate group instead of seeing them as, individuals with their own experiences and abilities.
It reminds me of, I was reading something about how even words like vulnerable, which sound pretty harmless, can be damaging when you use them to talk about older adults as a whole. It makes people think they're all frail and dependent, which just isn't true for everyone.
It's a tricky thing, We have to acknowledge that some older people might need some extra support, but we also can't just lump everyone together. The report suggests we should focus on what we need as we age, not what they need. It's about seeing it as a shared experience. Aging is something we all go through.
Yeah, breaking down those walls and having a conversation that includes everyone, right?
Yeah.
Instead of this us versus them thing that we see so often when we talk about getting older.
Exactly. And the report doesn't just point out the problems, it gives us better options too. Like instead of using elderly or senior citizens, it suggests using older adults or people in later life. It's a small change, but it can make a big difference in how we see and interact with, this whole group of people.
It's funny how little changes in how we talk can really change how we think, It reminds me of that study where they showed people the same picture of a guy, but they labeled it differently, once as college student and once as criminal. And just that one word made people see his face and his actions completely differently. It shows you how much power words have.
Totally. And that's what makes this report so important. It's making people aware of these subtle biases and giving us tools to talk about aging in a more thoughtful, inclusive way. And speaking of communication, the report also spends some time talking about storytelling. It says we need more stories about aging that are positive and realistic.
Yeah, for sure. We need stories that challenge those old stereotypes and show the full picture of what it's like to age. Stories that show resilience and wisdom and, how people keep growing and learning throughout their lives. But is there a risk of going too far? Like, what if we create these, superhuman portrayals of aging that are just as unrealistic as the negative ones?
You bring up a really good point, and the report actually warns against that. Yeah. It says balance is key. We need those inspiring stories, those amazing things that older adults are doing. But we also need to be real about the fact that everyone ages differently. There are so many factors that influence each person's journey.
So it's about showing a more complete picture of aging, right? One that doesn't ignore the challenges, but also celebrates the good stuff and recognizes that it's different for everyone.
Exactly. And the report really pushes the idea of sharing stories that resonate with people, stories that feel real. Instead of just focusing on the extraordinary stuff, we need stories that show what aging is really like. The day-to-day joys and sorrows and the challenges and triumphs. Stories that can help people connect across generations.
So it's about humanizing the aging experience, showing that it's not some abstract idea, but something we all share in some way.
Exactly. And the report gives us some concrete ways to do that. Like, it talks about working with media outlets to show more diverse and authentic portrayals of aging, encouraging community groups to host events where older people can share their stories. It even talks about making sure educational materials include age-inclusive narratives.
This is really making me think about what I can do in my own life. I care about social justice, but I haven't really thought much about ageism before. It's almost like it's been right in front of me the whole time, and I didn't see it.
It's a tricky kind of prejudice, isn't it? It's often so unconscious. But once you start paying attention, you see it everywhere.
You're right. And the more we talk about it, the more we can raise awareness and push back against these stereotypes.
Hmm.
This whole report has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm already starting to see things differently.
That's the power of learning, isn't it?
Yeah.
It opens our minds to new ways of seeing things and challenges the stuff we thought we knew. And that's what this report does so well. It doesn't just tell us what's wrong, it gives us the tools to start fixing it.
This has been an amazing deep dive so far, and I can't wait to hear what else the report has to say. But before we move on, I'm curious, have you run into any specific challenges or pitfalls when you talk about aging, things we should be aware of?
That's a great question, and the report actually addresses that directly. It talks about some common traps that people, even those with good intentions, can fall into. Like, one is getting too hung up on statistics about the aging population.
Really? Why is that a problem? Numbers are important, right? They show us how big the issue is.
They can be, but if we just keep hammering on about the silver tsunami, all those baby boomers getting older, it can actually make things worse. Instead of making people feel empathy and understanding, it can make them feel scared and anxious. They start worrying about being overwhelmed by older people, instead of seeing all the good things, all the contributions and opportunities that come with people living longer.
So instead of focusing on the burden, we should focus on the potential. Like, instead of seeing older adults as a drain on resources, we should see all the value they bring, all the ways they contribute to society.
Exactly. And the report is really big on using data strategically. It's not about just throwing numbers out there. It's about framing them in a way that highlights the positive aspects of aging. For example, instead of talking about rising healthcare costs for older people, you could talk about how much older workers contribute to the economy or all the hours they spend volunteering.
Right. It's about presenting a more balanced view of things. Are there any other pitfalls, other things we should watch out for?
Absolutely. Another one the report mentions is framing aging only as a civil rights issue. It's true, ageism is discrimination, but the report says that focusing only on that can be limiting. It can lead to people comparing ageism to other types of oppression, which can make some people feel like their struggles aren't being taken seriously.
Yeah, I can see that. It's
Yeah.
like saying, okay, ageism is bad, but it's not as bad as racism or sexism.
Mhm.
And that's not a helpful conversation to have.
Exactly. And the report also points out that framing aging solely as a civil rights issue can make people have a narrow view of ageism. They focus on things that can be dealt with through legal action instead of seeing the bigger societal forces at play. It's like they're so focused on the trees that they miss the whole forest.
So we need to look at this from a bigger perspective, recognizing that ageism is woven into the fabric of our society, but also understanding that it has its own unique characteristics.
Right. And last but not least, the report warns against confusing building public will with giving individual advice. Sometimes when we're trying to fight ageism, we get so caught up in giving people tips on how to age well that we forget about the bigger picture.
What do you mean by that? Isn't it good to give people information and strategies for aging gracefully?
It is, but if we want to create a society that's truly age-friendly, we can't just focus on what individuals can do. We have to advocate for change at a bigger level, for policies that support older people, for communities that are accessible and inclusive, for workplaces that value experience and wisdom. It's about creating an environment where everyone, regardless of their age, can thrive.
It's like that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. We can't just give people tips on how to navigate the system. We have to change the system itself.
That's it. And this report does such a good job of showing how those two things, individual actions and systemic change, are connected. It reminds us that we all have a part to play in building a world that's more just and equitable for people of all ages.
It's pretty empowering to realize that we're not just sitting on the sidelines. We can actually do something to create a better future for ourselves and the generations coming after us. This conversation has been so enlightening. I'm really looking forward to the final part of this deep dive. What other insights does this report have in store for us? As we wrap up this deep dive into reframing aging in America, it's incredible, how much this report makes you think. It's a call to action. It gives you the tools you need to make a change, and it shows us a path to a future that's more inclusive for everyone. But what does it all mean for you, the listener? How can you take all these ideas and actually do something with them?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We can sit here and talk about reframing aging, but it comes down to what we actually do. And that's the good thing about this report. It's not just about information, it's about empowering us. It's about giving us the power to make a difference.
It's like, okay, someone just handed us a set of keys to open this door that's been locked for way too long. And we can use those keys, the language, the storytelling, all those reframing strategies to challenge the way things are and create a more positive, more inclusive way of seeing aging.
That's it. And the cool thing is everyone has access to those keys. You don't need like a special degree or a big platform to make a difference. Every conversation you have, every story you share, every time you interact with an older person, that's a chance to change perceptions and break down those stereotypes.
It's about being mindful, being deliberate, and understanding that we each have the power to influence how people think about aging. I gotta admit, at first I felt a little overwhelmed, like where do I even start? But this report does a great job of breaking things down into steps, making it all seem less daunting.
Yeah, it does. One of the biggest things I took away from it is that it's okay to start small. You don't have to change the whole world's view on aging overnight. Just start by paying attention, to the language you use, the assumptions you make, the stories you're reading and watching. Call out those ageist jokes, those dismissive comments, those media portrayals that reinforce the negative stuff.
It's about becoming an advocate for positive aging in your own little corner of the world, right?
Exactly. And the report makes it clear that this isn't just about helping older people, it's about creating a better future for everyone. When we build a society that values and supports people of all ages, everybody wins.
That's a really important point. It's not about, setting generations against each other. It's about understanding how we're all connected and creating a world that works for all of us.
You got it. And the report has some practical advice too. It suggests getting involved with local organizations that work with older people, maybe volunteering your time, or even just having open, honest conversations with the older adults in your life.
Those are great ideas.
Yeah.
It's about taking those small steps, doing what you can, and knowing that together we can make a real difference.
Absolutely. And remember, the report is clear about this. It's a team effort. Creating a society that's better for older people, it's something we all have to work on together.
I love how this report, it takes the whole aging conversation and flips it.
Yeah.
It moves away from this idea of what we lose as we age and focuses on what we gain, the experience, the wisdom, the resilience, a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, it's about seeing aging as a natural part of life, something to celebrate, not something to be afraid of.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and I'm excited to see what you, the listener, do with all this information. How will you challenge ageism in your life, in your day-to-day? What stories will you share that help paint a better, more inclusive picture of aging? It's all up to you. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.